Guinea, the second largest island in the world after Greenland, is politically divided in two. The eastern half is Papua New Guinea. The western half is Irian Jaya, a former Dutch colony that became an Indonesian province in 1963. On the southern coast of this province live the Asmat. At the time this film was shot, the Asmat still practiced many of their traditions, based on maintaining a balance between the world of the living and the world of the dead, and on the relationship between virility and fertility. One of these unique traditions was the sago grub feast. The Asmat homeland is not a land as such, but a vast alluvial swamp, where a maze of rivers and streams cut and wind through dense flooded jungle. Survival in this inhospitable and insalubrious environment is a constant struggle. Many ceremonies have to be performed in order to improve fertility and ensure better hunting, fishing, and foraging. The sago grub feast is one of the most important. Six weeks before the feast is held, hundreds of sago palm trees are cut down and pierced with holes to entice Capricorn beetles into laying their eggs inside. 6 weeks is the time needed for the eggs to hatch and for the larvae to reach maturity. It's now time to harvest the grubs. For the Asmat, the sago palm is truly the tree of life. They use it to build homes, make their clothes, tools and utensils, and, most importantly, to obtain sago, a starchy flour which constitutes their staple diet. Each trunk will yield between 30 and 40 larvae. The sago grubs have a sweet hazelnut flavor. They're either eaten alive or barbecued. They are the Asmat's caviar, and a compulsory delicacy of a festive menu. The sago grub feast usually coincides with the consecration of a new men's house. A men's house is the center of the social and ceremonial life of a village. It's both a club where the men gather and a sacred place where the living and the dead can meet. Because the humid tropical climate makes wooden buildings quickly rot, men's houses have to be rebuilt every 4 or 5 years. And a celebration is organized for their inauguration. 2 large cylinders of bark and leaves will be erected. The cylinders, later to be filled with sago grubs, are over 2 meters high. One of them, wrapped in leaves, symbolizes virility. The other, wrapped in mats, represents both the sago tree, the tree of life, and the vagina. Women are allowed inside the men's house only in exceptional circumstances, such as the night before the feast. On that night, the communal house is theirs, and the only male guests are the drummers. Dance follows dance, the excitement increases, and sexual illusions become more and more explicit. The Asmat believe the sexual act to have a very important purpose in achieving a balance between the world of the living and the world of the dead. During ceremonies such as the sago grub feast or in times of trouble, this balance can be maintained or restored thanks to an increased flow of semen. Apart from incest, everything is then allowed, and they practice the papij ritual, a sacred form of adultery, when the men exchange their wives. During the past few days, most of these women have made love with someone else's husband, and they're full of obscene, admiring, or mocking jokes about their exchange partners. The dancers have a long night ahead. In between dances, they eat sago to regain their strength. The next morning, the cylinders will be filled with sago grubs, but as they reach the ceiling of the men's house, part of the roof has to be removed to allow access. The sago grub feast is the only Asmat ceremony in which women play an important part. After dancing around the cylinders through the night, they now have to fill them up. One by one, they pour in their tribute, keeping an eye on those coming before and after them. For one of the women may be tempted to cheat and save a few grubs for her own consumption. The height of the feast comes with the opening of the cylinders. The grubs that seem to flow out of a horn of plenty are the symbol of life. Life comes from inside women, the Asmat say, as the flower comes from inside sago palms. The time has come for the families of the clan to share the bounty. The recipe to prepare this Asmat delicacy is very simple. First, finely grate the pulp of a young sago palm and sprinkle with flour. Then take a sago leaf, remove the central stem, and fold the leaf in two. Using pieces of the stem, hold the edges together to make a container. Pour in your mixture and add the grubs, having first removed their heads. Close up the leaf as tightly as possible. Finally, proceed to cook. This is where the participation of the women ends. The rest of the feast is the business of men. The moment is solemn. The men of the organizing clan prepare to offer the grub cakes to the men with whom they have exchanged wives. Accepting, as well as offering this dish, is a tribute paid to a papij partner. Like every other feast, the sago grub feast is an opportunity to strengthen existing bonds or to make new alliances, which in principle can only be broken by the death of one of the partners. In the dangerous world of the asmat, establishing such alliances is essential. They create a bond between partners that makes it their duty to help each other in times of trouble. The more alliances a man forms, the more his influence and prestige increase. Symbolic fights take place during every asmat ceremony. Favoring physical contact between the sexes, who rarely mix in normal circumstances, are a prelude to the exchange of wives. Such loud cries can only announce a death. The asmat believe there is no such thing as a natural death. If the old man had died violently or in an accident, an interrogation ritual would have been performed. The corpse would have been asked many questions until, through a convulsion, he revealed who or what was to blame for his demise. The widow has covered herself with mud to hide her smell. This is a protective measure designed to prevent the dead man from identifying her and trying to take her with him. To show that she is in mourning, she has also shaved her head. A grave has been dug, but the ground is saturated and the hole is full of water. To prevent the corpse from being rejected by the mud, it's tied to branches placed across the trench. The widow tries to throw herself into her husband's grave, but she's merely doing what is expected of her, as tradition demands that close relatives should perform ostentatious and dramatic displays of grief. Her wails and tears will continue for weeks. Since the 1960s, the presence of missionaries has led to the disappearance of the traditional funeral rites. In the past, the dead man would not have been buried, but placed on a platform in front of his house until his body had decayed and his skull could be retrieved. A month has passed since the funeral. The widow leaves her house for the first time, her face hidden by a hood to make her less attractive and to discourage men from wooing her. Harsh tradition condemns widows to sexual abstinence and celibacy.
My husband never urged anyone to kill. He was full of love.
Do you still cry when you think about him?
Yes, I cry every day. Even yesterday I cried.
The Asmat share their life between the forest, where they find their food, and their official village, where the Indonesian authorities are attempting to settle them permanently. Today is Sunday, and a very special Sunday for the local priest.
Today we are celebrating the first baptism in the region. Today 62 men and women will be born again in Christ.
Mass is said in Indonesian, the language of missionaries and school teachers, a language that most women and old people do not understand. Although it does not look like one, this ceremony is a Catholic baptism, but it mirrors a ritual that used to take place at the end of a tribal war. As a guarantee of peace, one clan adopted some adolescents from the rival clan. The youngsters had to crawl through a tunnel made up of the bodies of men lying down and the legs of women standing over. This ritual, symbolizing childbirth, sealed their entry into their new clan. For their baptism, the newborn children are placed on a heap of fresh sago fibers. The plant placenta covering them is then removed. To be born again in Christ is not just a word for the Asmat. Acting as midwives are the godparents of the newly baptized.
Now that tribal warfare has been banned, the men have very few opportunities to show their bravery. Their only chance is during a feast. The Asmat have no wish to give up their traditional rituals and feasts. Neither do they want to give up their body pieces and paints. Normally, they lead simple lives. They eat sago and fish, and they drink only water. But during feasts, they gorge themselves. However, the spirit of their feasts is neither blasphemous towards religion, nor is it an offense against government policy.
The Catholic missionaries of the Crozier congregation arrived in the 1950s. Before attempting to convert the Asmat, they spent time trying to understand them. When they realized that such warriors would not abandon their ancestral customs in the course of a few years, the missionaries decided instead to adapt their teachings to the way of life and the beliefs of the Asmat. This baptism is a tremendous success for them.
Aku permandikan engkau atas nama Bapa dan Putra dan Roh Kudus. Amin. Akata emak, inilah tanda kemenangan Yesus Kristus atas keselamatanmu.
The ceremony ends with another scene borrowed from the Asmat adoption ritual. The men have each been given a child's bow to shoot an arrow into the sky. The women have received a pair of cooking tongs, which they beat against a beam that, like the sky, symbolizes the house of God. Civilization has reached the Asmat and dramatically changed their way of life. Baptism has replaced ancestral rituals. Brotherly love has displaced the thirst for revenge. The Indonesian anthem has supplanted the headhunters' war songs, and schooling has taken over from training for nomadic life in the forest.